Ellen DeGeneres stopped mid-sentence, her eyes locked on the 19-year-old sitting across from her. The studio audience held their breath as America's beloved host stared at Marcus Thompson with an expression they'd never seen before, pure determination mixed with something that looked like barely contained excitement. What happened in the next 60 seconds would become the most motivational moment in television history. Because sometimes, when legends collide over a story of impossible odds, magic doesn't just happen. It explodes into millions of hearts and changes everything. Nobody in that Warner Bros. Studio knew they were about to witness something unprecedented. Not the cameras rolling, not the producers frantically adjusting their equipment, and certainly not Marcus Thompson, the former high school football star, who thought he was just there to share his story of surviving a life-changing accident. But Ellen knew. Ellen had been planning this moment for 3 weeks, ever since a video had gone viral that made her call Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson personally and say 7 words that would change a young man's life forever. "There's a warrior who needs to meet you." The video wasn't typical social media content. It was raw, unfiltered, shot on a phone in a dimly lit garage gym. In it, Marcus Thompson, 6 feet tall, powerfully built despite his challenges, was training with a yeet intensity that took your breath away. But what made the video go viral wasn't just his incredible strength. It was what he said at the end, exhausted and sweating, looking directly into the camera. "They told me I'd never be an athlete again. They said my dreams were over. But every morning I wake up and I choose to prove them wrong, even if nobody's watching." But this is where the story gets incredible. Because The Rock was watching, Ellen was watching, and what they decided to do about it would transform not just Marcus's life, but how America thinks about what it means to be unstoppable. Now, as Marcus sat in that guest chair wearing his best button-down shirt, carefully chosen to hide the scars on his arms from the accident, he had no idea that his entire world was about to explode with possibility. Ellen leaned forward, her voice carrying that familiar warmth, but with an undertone of something deeper, something more purposeful. "Marcus, tell me about the moment everything changed. Take us back to that night 2 years ago." Marcus shifted slightly in his chair, his prosthetic leg positioned carefully. Even now, sitting still was a conscious effort, a reminder of how much his body had changed. The studio audience, 300 people strong, could sense this wasn't going to be a typical feel-good interview. This was going somewhere deeper. "It was October 15th, my senior year," Marcus began, his voice steady but carrying the weight of someone who'd told this story many times, mostly to himself in dark moments. "I was driving home from football practice. We'd just won our homecoming game, and I was on top of the world. Full ride scholarship to USC, NFL scouts already calling. I thought my life was mapped out perfectly." Ellen nodded, but she was studying Marcus's face. In 20 years of interviewing guests, she had developed an instinct for reading people, and everything about Marcus, the way he unconsciously touched his leg, the careful control in his voice, the flicker of pain that crossed his eyes when he mentioned USC, told Ellen this young man was carrying something heavier than grief. He was carrying the weight of dreams deferred. "What happened on that drive home?" Marcus took a deep breath. "Drunk driver ran a red light. Hit me going 60 miles an hour. I don't remember the impact, but I remember waking up in the hospital 3 days later and seeing my mom's face. She'd been crying for 72 hours straight. The studio had gone completely quiet. Even the camera operators, who had seen everything in daytime television, were listening with the kind of attention usually reserved for breaking news. The doctors were honest with me," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. "They said I was lucky to be alive. They said the fact that I could walk again at all was a miracle. But when they told me my football career was over, when they said I'd never be able to compete at that level again, I felt like I'd died in that accident after all." Ellen felt her eyes filling up, but she didn't look away from Marcus. "How did you find your way back to training? Because I saw your video, and what you're doing in that garage, that's not just working out, that's preparation for something bigger." Marcus's face lit up for the first time since he'd started talking. "Wrestling. My physical therapist suggested it as a way to build strength differently. At first I hated it. It wasn't football. It wasn't what I'd planned. But then I realized something. Wrestling isn't about the body you have. It's about the heart you bring to the mat." "Tell me about that garage where you train." "It's my neighbor's garage. Mr. Rodriguez. He's 75 years old, former Marine. When he heard about my accident, he cleared out his garage and bought used wrestling mats with his Social Security money. He said every warrior needs a place to train, and he wasn't going to let me give up on being a warrior just because the battlefield changed." Ellen felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't just a story about overcoming physical challenges. This was a story about community, about older generations lifting up younger ones, about finding new dreams when old ones get shattered. "Marcus, what's your dream now? What are you training for?" For the first time in the interview, Marcus hesitated. Ellen could see him wrestling with something internal, some fear of speaking his hopes out loud. "The Paralympics," he said quietly. "I want to represent Team USA in wrestling. I know it sounds crazy. I've only been training for 18 months, but I've already placed in 3 regional competitions. My coach thinks—" Marcus looked down at his hands, then back up at Ellen. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "It would mean that October 15th wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a different chapter." But Ellen wasn't just listening as a talk show host anymore. She was listening as someone who was about to deliver news that would change Marcus's life forever. Because sitting backstage, watching this conversation on a monitor, was Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. "Marcus," Ellen said, standing up from her chair, "there's someone here who's been listening to our conversation. Someone who knows a thing or two about turning setbacks into comebacks, about redefining what strength means." Marcus looked confused. "What do you mean?" Ellen walked toward the wings of the stage, and the studio audience began to buzz with anticipation. They could sense something massive was about to happen. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ellen announced, her voice carrying across the studio like thunder, "please welcome someone who embodies everything we've been talking about, Mr. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson." The studio exploded. 300 people jumped to their feet, screaming, applauding, the sound waves practically shaking the building. But Ellen was watching Marcus, who had gone completely still. His mouth fell open, his hands gripped the arms of his chair, and then his eyes filled with tears. The Rock walked onto that stage like he owned it, which, in that moment, he did. But he wasn't carrying his usual larger-than-life energy. He was carrying something more powerful, focused, purposeful intensity, aimed directly at the young man sitting in that chair. "Marcus," The Rock said, his voice carrying that distinctive blend of warmth and authority that had made him one of the most beloved figures in entertainment. "I've been watching your video for 3 weeks straight, brother, and I've got some things to say to you." Marcus couldn't speak. He was shaking, tears streaming down his face, staring at the man whose motivational posts had gotten him through his darkest nights in the hospital. But this is where the story becomes something nobody expected. Something that would change not just Marcus's life, but how millions of people thought about resilience, about reinvention, about the warrior spirit that lives inside everyone who refuses to quit. The Rock didn't sit down. Instead, he knelt in front of Marcus's chair, bringing himself to eye level with the young athlete. It was a gesture that spoke volumes. This global superstar, this former WWE champion, this Hollywood icon, was positioning himself as an equal to a 19-year-old with a prosthetic leg and a garage gym. "Marcus, can I tell you something? When Ellen called me 3 weeks ago and showed me your video, I didn't see a disabled athlete. I saw something that reminded me of myself 25 years ago. You know what I saw?" Marcus shook his head, still unable to speak. "I saw a warrior who got knocked down and decided to get back up differently. I saw someone who took the worst day of his life and decided it wasn't going to be the last chapter of his story. But most importantly, I saw someone who understands what real strength looks like." The studio audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. "See, Marcus, people think strength is about what you can lift, how fast you can run, how hard you can hit. But that's not strength. That's just power. Real strength, warrior strength, is what you do when everything falls apart. Real strength is training in a garage because you refuse to let circumstances define your ceiling." The Rock reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something that made Marcus gasp. It was a photo, the same viral video screenshot that had started this whole chain of events, but it had been printed and signed. "I wrote something on this photo," The Rock said, handing it to Marcus. "But before you read it, I want to tell you what I'm going to do for you." Marcus took the photo with trembling hands, but The Rock wasn't finished. "First, you're never training in a garage again. I'm building you a world-class training facility, not just for you, but for other adaptive athletes who need a place to chase their dreams. Equipment, coaches, everything you need to make that Paralympic team." The audience erupted, but The Rock held up his hand. "Second, I'm covering all your training expenses, competition fees, travel costs, everything, from now until you either make Team USA or decide you want to pursue something else. But knowing what I know about you, I think we're going to be booking a lot of plane tickets to competitions." Marcus was sobbing now, but they were tears of disbelief, of dreams suddenly becoming possible, of a future that had seemed impossibly far away, suddenly becoming reachable. But most importantly, The Rock continued, his voice dropping to something more intimate, more personal. I want to be your training partner, not your coach. You've got good coaches, but when you need someone to push you, when you need someone to remind you that you're capable of more than you know, I want to be that voice. The studio audience was on their feet again, but The Rock and Marcus were locked in their own bubble, warrior to warrior, dreamer to dreamer. Now read what I wrote on that photo. Marcus looked down at the image, himself, exhausted and sweating in that garage, but with his fist raised in defiance. Across the bottom, in The Rock's handwriting, to Marcus, the garage was just your origin story. The world is your stage. Stay hungry, stay humble, but most importantly, stay ready, because your time is now. Your warrior brother, Dwayne. Marcus completely broke down, not from sadness but from the overwhelming realization that his dreams, the ones he'd been afraid to speak out loud, were not only possible, but supported by someone he'd idolized for years. But Ellen had one more surprise. She walked over and knelt beside both men. Marcus, there's something else. The Rock isn't the only one who's been following your story. Ellen gestured toward the same large screen that had shown other surprises on previous shows. On it appeared a familiar logo, Team USA Paralympics. Marcus Thompson, said a voice from the screen. It was the head coach of the U.S. Paralympic wrestling team. We've been watching your competition videos. We'd like to formally invite you to the Olympic Training Center for an evaluation. Based on what we've seen, we believe you have the potential to represent the United States at the next Paralympic Games. The studio erupted again, but this time the celebration felt different. This wasn't just applause for a heartwarming moment. This was recognition of something bigger, the moment when a young man's impossible dream suddenly became an inevitable reality. Marcus stood up, still shaking, still crying, and did something that would become the defining image of the entire episode. He embraced The Rock, not as a fan meeting his hero, but as one warrior acknowledging another. "Thank you," Marcus whispered. "Thank you for seeing something in me that I was afraid to see in myself." "Brother," The Rock replied, his own voice thick with emotion, "I didn't give you anything you didn't already have. I just reminded you where to look for it." Ellen looked at the camera, tears streaming down her own face. "You know what, folks? This is why we do this show. Not for the entertainment, though we love that too, but for moments like this. Moments when we remember that setbacks are just setups for comebacks, and sometimes all a warrior needs is someone to believe in their fight." The show ended with Marcus, Ellen, and The Rock standing together. But the image that would be shared millions of times was The Rock and Marcus, hands clasped, both of them grinning like they'd just conquered the world. Because in a way, they had. 6 months later, Marcus Thompson was training at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. The facility The Rock had promised was under construction, a state-of-the-art adaptive athletics center that would serve dozens of athletes like Marcus. But more importantly, Marcus was ranked third in the country in his weight class and had qualified for the World Championships. But the real transformation wasn't just physical. Marcus had become a voice for adaptive athletes, speaking at schools and rehabilitation centers about redefining what's possible. His message was simple but powerful. The accident didn't end my story. It just changed the genre from sports movie to superhero origin story. The Rock kept his promise about being a training partner. Every few weeks, his schedule permitting, he'd show up at Marcus's training sessions. Not for publicity, not for cameras, but to push iron with a young man who'd reminded him why he fell in love with the idea of being unstoppable in the first place. Ellen kept a photo from that day in her dressing room. The Rock and Marcus, both flexing, both laughing, both understanding that strength comes in many forms. Every time she looked at it, she remembered why she loved her job. Not for the celebrity interviews or the comedy sketches, but for moments when television became a force for transformation. And Marcus, he still trains every day, but not in a garage anymore. He trains in a facility that bears a plaque by the entrance, dedicated to every warrior who refuses to let circumstances define their ceiling. Train like your dreams depend on it, because they do. The video that started it all, Marcus training in that garage, declaring his intention to prove everyone wrong, has been viewed over 50 million times, but the follow-up video, shot 6 months later at the Olympic Training Center, has been viewed even more. In it, Marcus stands next to his Team USA gear, but the message is the same. They told me I'd never be an athlete again. Today I'm training to represent my country at the Paralympics. Sometimes the only way to prove them wrong is to prove yourself right. His physical therapist, the one who first suggested wrestling, keeps a newspaper clipping from Marcus's first World Championship competition on her office wall. The headline reads, "Garage Gym to Global Stage, the Marcus Thompson Story." But the quote underneath is what matters most. Every setback is a setup for a comeback. You just have to be willing to train for it. The Rock, meanwhile, has expanded his support beyond Marcus. The adaptive athletics facility has grown into a network of training centers across the country, each one equipped to help athletes who've been told their dreams are over discover that sometimes they're just beginning. Because that's the real magic of that day on Ellen. It wasn't just about one young man getting help. It was about redefining what strength looks like, what comebacks are possible, and what happens when someone believes in your fight even when you're not sure you believe in it yourself. Every morning, Marcus wakes up and puts on his prosthetic leg, laces up his wrestling shoes, and walks into a training facility that exists because he refused to let October 15th be the end of his story. And every morning, he proves that the most powerful muscle in the human body isn't in your arms or legs, it's the one between your ears that refuses to quit. The garage where it all started still exists. Mr. Rodriguez, the 75-year-old Marine who cleared it out for Marcus, has converted it into a community fitness space for other young people who need a place to train. On the wall hangs the original wrestling mat where Marcus first learned to fight back against circumstances that seemed impossible to overcome. Above it, a sign reads, "Every champion started somewhere. This is where one warrior learned to get back up." Share this story if you believe in the power of refusing to quit. Comment below if you've ever had to redefine your dreams. And remember, setbacks are just setups for comebacks. You just have to be willing to train for the comeback you deserve. Because in the end, that's what The Rock, Ellen, and Marcus taught us that day. That strength isn't about the body you have. It's about the heart you bring to the fight. That dreams don't die in accidents. They just learn to fight differently. And that sometimes the most important victory isn't winning a gold medal or making a team, it's proving to yourself that you're still worthy of having big dreams. The fight continues in training centers across America, where adaptive athletes wake up every day ready to prove that limitations are just starting points for innovation. And somewhere in Colorado Springs, a young man who was told he'd never be an athlete again is training to represent his country at the highest level of international competition. The warrior spirit, it turns out, doesn't live in perfect bodies. It lives in hearts that refuse to surrender, in minds that refuse to accept impossible, and in spirits that understand that every ending is just a new beginning in disguise.